Ladies and gentlemen, I just have to ask you, what the hell is going on with our politics? So let's just get straight into the news story. And the first is, this is a news story that Helen Zille went to a business conference and basically had quite a lot to say. Let's go into the first thing she had to say. So the first thing she had to say is that the business community wanted the DA to protect Ramaphosa, because according to the business community, had the ANC gone into a coalition with the EFF or the MK party, it would have been disastrous for the country. Investors would have left. So the first thing I've really got to ask is, this is an article put out by IOL. And look at the level of journalism involved in this article. The article says, and I quote, the MK party gave the DA chest pains after securing staggering successes in the elections. Chest pains. Is this a news article by an actual news outlet or a guy tweeting on Twitter what he thinks? This is pathetic. Chest pains. He says the DA said it was a disaster and would cause lots of people, particularly in the business community, to lose interest and somehow take the business elsewhere. Well, yes, that's correct. Because you see, the EFF and the MK party both represented forms of expropriation without compensation, which meant that their business interests, their capital, remember these are two parties that were anti-capitalist, could essentially mean that their investments would disappear. That's not what anybody who uses their money would want. But to basically say in an actual news article that it's just that the DA is not for black people or would never develop the black community. Is this a subreddit or is it a news article? This is pathetic. Let's get on to the next story. Do you remember when we said that Iran had basically funded the ANC? We said, well, we thought that might be the case. It's just that when you actually look at all the logical conclusions, this is basically what it seemed like had been going on. And maybe that was why they were pursuing the old court action with the International Court of Human Rights against Israel. It's not to say that what Israel's doing is correct, but in any case, we did say, why us, of all people? But according to Helen, she also went out and basically said that during the GNU negotiations, the ANC wanted to hold on to the international relationships portfolio more than anything else. Apparently, they got really, really obsessive with this. And according to her, it's because the ANC wanted to maintain rogue relations with various individuals. And those individuals were rogue nations that were funding the ANC. Now, again, this kind of leads credence into what we said. We did say that we suspected that there may have potentially been, allegedly, because we don't know, there may have been funds that have gone through to Iran or even Russia that have gone off to the ANC. And you could infer this quite logically. You see, we have this amazing thing called a brain, 2 hours, and we can read the news. And what we noticed is that the ANC was basically bankrupt. For those of you who don't recall, Loot Freely House was basically about to be expropriated without compensation for failing to pay their legal bills and their bills for election posters, if you recall that. And amazingly, we took Israel to the International Court and the ANC found the money underneath somebody's sofa. They paid off their debts. And remember, they had a big SARS debt because they weren't paying PAYE and all the other stuff. Well, suddenly that got paid, coincidentally. So it was easy to infer it. Yes, correlation doesn't always mean causation, but in this instance, the correlation and the causation seem deeply entwined and intrinsic. So it was obvious that this was what was occurring. Anybody who was just reading the news could infer it. Helen further went on and said, elections are fought and won by identities in South Africa, not politics. And this explains why Jacob Zuma, a man who, according to her, looted a lot of South Africa's money, still got a lot of the vote because Zulu people wanted to vote for Zuma. It's also why, according to her, the Mkhatha Freedom Party gets so many votes in KZN because it's a Zulu nationalist party and Zulus vote for Zulus. Now, this is interesting because she then went on to basically say what her words are going to say. They're going to upset a lot of people. She says, but the truth always upsets others. Always upsets others, she says. And, people should just learn not to be upset because the truth is the truth. She also says she doesn't mind if she's the most hated, offensive politician out there because she's just telling the truth. And she knows that when you get in trouble for telling the truth, that basically history will always prove you right. She says, but I'm reminded, ladies and gentlemen, there was another man who once said uncomfortable truths about voting on identity lines. You may recall his name. His name was Ramon Cabernet. He basically said something very similar. And then the DA federal executive forced John Steenhuisen to remove Ramon from office because he was bringing the party into disrepute, because they were writing news articles about him, about how he was suddenly a racist, because he said this very statement. I love it when commie mentality comes out. Rules for thee, but not for me. And the irony is, Helen wrote an entire book about this and then proceeded to ignore everything in her book and just do all the normal commies do anyway. Yes, these people are shameless. Talking of being absolutely shameless, let's move on to the news in KZN, because just when you thought things couldn't get more clownish, well, they did. Because in a municipality, in a local elections in municipality, the ANC has come out and basically tried to evict their own mayor. You know, the usual way they evict people. They just go, oh, vote of no confidence. This was their way of just chucking people out they don't like. Now, they asked the DA and the IFP to vote for them, and they didn't. And now, according to the ANC, the DA is self-serving and the IFP are divisive. The DA will never work for the interests of black people, and they want to be anti-revolutionary, and they just want to work in the best interests of white people, and they're a centre-right party, and how dare they, and why are we even in government with them? But don't worry, we're not collapsing the provincial government and national unity there, which includes the DA. But you know, the DA are just white and horrible. It's amazing how the ANC, when it doesn't get its own way, resorts to the usual race screaming. It's just shameless. Because you see, they don't seem to understand something. As D. McPherson said, there are no agreements in local government. They very easily forget that in Durban, the EFF and the ANC are in coalition against the DA and the IFP's wishes. They specifically pursued their coalition in a bankrupt municipality that's really going to hell in a handbasket. They also forget that they kicked out Celius Brinks in Gauteng, in Swane specifically. And Helen made it very clear when that occurred that this would mean the ANC and the DA would find it harder to find themselves in local government municipalities because there would be a lack of trust. And a lack of trust is now what there is. But it's amazing now that that lack of trust exists, the ANC have a problem with it. And you know what? It's fine to have a problem with it. Then for the entire narrative to collapse into brace baiting screaming is just shameful. Talking of shameful, this is now moving on to the next news, which is that the EFF and the MK party, in terms of their progressive caucus, appear to be drifting further and further apart. Now, you see, the idea behind the progressive caucus was originally for these two parties to basically kind of like form an alliance, hold the ANC to account. When the ANC's GNU falls apart, they could stand up and say, hey, guys, we're the progressive caucus. You guys want to be progressive. We can all be RET together. And they were there to basically act as like a linchpin that the ANC could ultimately gravitate towards when the GNU collapsed. Now, the idea then was that they could also help facilitate the GNU to collapse by stroking the egos of those in the progressive parts of the ANC, the RET faction of the ANC, and those individuals would basically put pressure on the main leadership of the ANC, which would cause fractures in the entire way that everything works. That was basically the idea. But according to the EFF now, the MK party isn't focusing on the ANC or even GNU. It's actually focusing on it, because what the MK party keeps seeming to do is recruit its members. And those members, when they move over to there, according to the EFF, those members only go over to there because they're basically looking for career opportunities. They think that Jacob Zuma is still angry because he got forced out of the presidency. He wants to be president again. Everybody who supports him may end up as a government minister. So these people are pursuing forms of careerism, according to them. And ultimately what they're doing is they're gravitating towards the MK party, and then they're basically trying to collapse the EFF from outside because now they're part of the MK party and they want to prove their loyalty. So according to the EFF, this progressive caucus isn't actually really meshing because it appears that the MK party are basically trying to kill it, not the ANC, which is what they should be doing. So talking of progressive parties that are constantly appear to be upset, let's move then on to the next news story, which is actually, this is the news story involving the South African Communist Party. So the South African Communist Party have been told now by the ANC's top leadership, can you actually just engage with us? You don't need to feel scared about telling us your views. You don't need to feel threatened, but you need to engage with us. Stop doing things in the public environment. Because you see, what the South African Communist Party appears to keep doing is voicing their rejection of the GNU and what they feel it means to be a sellout in a public platform. What they're not actually doing is going and discussing the entire situation with the leadership in the ANC itself, which means that they're basically bringing the ANC into disrepute on a public platform. Now, even Gwede Matashe has had to come out and basically say, look, the GNU and our involvement with the DA wasn't prize number one. It was something that we were forced into because we lost the elections. And now we need to stop focusing, according to even Gwede, we need to stop focusing on all the little ideological differences, and we need to focus on service delivery and delivering services to the public. This is a very mature approach from Gwede, and I'll take my hat off to him for it, because this is exactly why the ANC lost the elections in the first place. It was the lack of service delivery. And unfortunately, as even the news article says, this has all been also made worsened by parties inside the ANC itself, such as Panyesa Lesufi, who is basically engaging into more public spats and not focusing enough on service delivery, which is what we've seen in all of the Gauteng municipalities. So what can we actually take from this? Well, let's actually start off with the first point. The first article I referred to is just shameful, because this is IOL, a party that is now withdrawn from the press council because they don't want to be held accountable for actually giving factual-based news. This is a newspaper, remember, a newspaper who's basically issued a news article that reads like a child wrote it on Reddit. But in any case, the article itself does deal with an important element. The business community in South Africa didn't want an EFF-MK coalition because it would be bad for business. It's what everybody was calling prior to the elections a anti-business coalition. This is factual. And to say you don't care about what the business community wants is for you to basically misunderstand one fundamental problem with South Africa. The biggest problem that we have here is that of high unemployment. We have one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. This is why people are not voting for the ANC, because people want jobs and they want reasonable prospects. They don't want a handout. They want a hand up. They want to be able to make their own way in the world. They don't want to live off 350 grants. So you can't just disregard what the business community wanted. At the same time, one has to remember that these parties are still political opponents. Where you have the Progressive Caucus, the MK Party, and the EFF, they're still political opponents, which means the forms of political infighting are always going to occur. This is what's going to occur at local branches and at national government, local government, provincial government. It's going to occur everywhere. The ANC and the DA, the IFP, the PA, they're not always going to see eye to eye all the time. They're not a single party. There will constantly be infighting. But when the infighting results to nothing more than name calling and the old, oh, everybody's racist stuff, this is pathetic. This is not mature politics. So what this all shows us is that South Africa's maturity in terms of the political landscape is still developing. And it's still nowhere near what we think we would want or need from our political class. The political class being, for want of a better word, when it comes through to service delivery, just right down incompetent, focusing more on ideological disputes than actually just getting the job done. But in any case, that's my thoughts. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. This is just another day in Retardanistan as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, until tomorrow. Bye.